President Trump heading back to Washington, as I mentioned at the top of the program, after the summit with Xi Jinping. The president, on his way back, touted, quote, fantastic trade deals, unquote, between the U.S. and China. Our Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, what do we know, if anything, about how fantastic these things are?
Well, Major, if you're someone who works for or invests in Boeing, it is indeed fantastic. The big major aviation company just a few minutes ago confirming that it now has a commitment from China to purchase at least 200 aircraft, quote, and we expect further commitments will follow after this initial tranche. That was a big goal of the company to restart relations and business with China after several years of not having it. And Boeing was among the companies represented on this trip by their top executives, the president bringing many of them with him to China to demonstrate the eagerness of American companies to continue investment and business in that country. But beyond that, we don't have much more in terms of what exactly the major trade deals are that have been cut. Now, typically after this kind of a big trip, it takes a few days perhaps for the paperwork to process, the I's to be dotted, the T's to be crossed. And so we'll see maybe by Monday, Tuesday, if we have any better sense of what else economically, at least, was worked out. On the global problems front, if you will, the president signaled that China said to him it will not be providing military aid to Iran. But, of course, it was in your interview with the Israeli prime minister last weekend where he signaled that perhaps China was, in fact, providing some kind of material assistance to Iran. We'll see ultimately what China opts to do when it comes to that crisis.
And one of the ways in which the Chinese might have communicated this is direct. And there's substantial evidence that indirect through third-party companies, Chinese military equipment is making its way to Iran. Details to be scrutinized there in the future, to be sure. What about future arms sales to Taiwan? Because the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, made it very clear that that's at the top of his list, and it was kind of a diplomatic flex in the president's direction to make sure he does not, from the Chinese president's perspective, misstep here.
Right. And on the flight back, he told reporters that he hasn't decided whether or not Taiwan will get about $14 billion in weapons shipments that Congress has authorized. The president has to sign off on them. He signaled that for the first time since the late 1970s, a sitting American president may reach out to speak directly with the leader of Taiwan regarding the weapons shipments. That is a big break with diplomatic norms, and in part because you don't want to upset the Chinese by having direct leader-to-leader engagement. But what the president signaled as well is that the sort of the norms that have been in place regarding the U.S., Taiwan, and China since the 1980s perhaps need to be rethought and updated. It was a Reagan-era decision that essentially has the United States continue sending weapons to Taiwan and not discuss that issue with China. What the president signaled today is he may be reconsidering that. But on the flip side, when you were talking about issues of democracy and of concern to the countries that aren't of the economic or military nature, there was the issue of political prisoners. The president suggested that on the case of Jimmy Lai, that major democracy activist from Hong Kong, the Chinese may be less willing to free him, but they may be open to releasing a gentleman known as Ezra Jin, a pastor who was arrested last October for his role in leading the underground Zion Church. Suggested that Xi may be open to releasing him. That case has earned a lot of attention and concern from this administration and others across this country for religious freedom reasons. But on Taiwan, that the president would signal he at least heard the Chinese president and maybe reconsidering the American position, that won't sit well with many very worried about the future of the China, Taiwan, and U.S. situation.
Ed O'Keefe, North Lawn of the White House. As always, thank you very much.